but we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, girls and boys. It's 7 o'clock and I am Laurence Fox. Tonight, I am discussing the inevitable, predictable and misogynistic annihilation of women's sports and how not its first or last victim has been slaughtered at the altar of equity. Well done, everyone. You can soon go to any sporting event and it will be entirely populated by blokes doing woman face. Then I will welcome you to the Fox and Hounds panel. I am the Fox and I have 2 news hounds with me to digest some of the biggest news of the week. And finally, we slip across the pond for the latest on the Donald Trump indictment saga and the Hunter Biden laptop nightmare. I did a film on it, by the way. And don't forget, most importantly, I want to hear from you, so send me your views this way at gbnews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at LozFox. That's all coming up after headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Laurence, thank you and good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The first state visit of King Charles to France has been postponed because of protests across the country. Tens of thousands of people have been demonstrating against the government's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. The King was due to arrive on Sunday as part of a week-long trip to Europe. The French president has suggested the new date for the visit will be in the early summer. The Windsor Framework has now formally been adopted by the UK and the EU. The Foreign Secretary and European Commission chaired a meeting earlier to sign off the post-Brexit trade agreement. That's after MPs voted in favour of the Stormont break, despite continued opposition from the DUP. The Prime Minister has stressed the importance of upholding democratic values during a meeting with his Israeli counterpart. Benjamin Netanyahu's in London as thousands rally in Israel and here against a law that's been approved by his right-wing coalition. Critics say it's designed to shield him from his corruption trial. Rishi Sunak also called for a de-escalation of tensions in the West Bank. While outside Downing Street, demonstrators describe Netanyahu's controversial reforms as unacceptable. Security guards at Heathrow Airport will go ahead with strikes over the Easter holiday after talks over pay have failed. The airport says it has contingency plans in place to deal with the 10-day walkout and keep it running as normal. Heathrow says they've offered a 10% pay rise to workers. Ofsted says school inspections will continue despite calls from teaching unions for them to be suspended. 3 unions say they should be paused while a review is carried out. It's after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life in January whilst awaiting her school report. The Ofsted chief says that wouldn't be in the best interests of children. Meanwhile, head teacher Sophie Greenaway says the mental health of staff should be a priority. And Premier League has referred Everton to an independent commission to question reported losses of over £370 million. Everton's loss during the 2021-22 season allegedly breaches the league's profit and financial sustainability rules, allowing clubs to lose a maximum of £105 million over a 3-year period or face sanctions. TV, online and DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Laurence Fox.
One of the drawbacks to a democracy is that once mankind has been freed to pursue his own ambitions and goals within the meritocratic system, and the dice have fallen where they will, there will no doubt be some that come out the other side better off than others. Society tries to mitigate the inevitable inequality caused by some folks being taller, faster, smarter or stronger than others via a commitment to charity, philanthropy and, perhaps most importantly, equality of opportunity. A mutual commitment to give everyone a decent swing of the bat of life and to remove as many obstacles as possible in order to maximise human flourishing. It is by no means a perfect system, but as Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other forms that have been tried. And now, as the shadows begin to lengthen and we head into the autumn of Western hegemony, it often seems that democracy is rather rapidly falling apart as human beings begin to obsess about the strangest of topics. The affluent and leisured, sofa-dwelling, screen-addicted citizens of 2023, sozzled on righteous dopamine hits from our digital crack pipes, have run short of wrongs to right and inequality to stamp out. So instead, we take a lazy but inevitable turn towards something altogether more spooky: radical equality. The capitalists' socialism, if you will, where affluent citizens, unencumbered by trifling matters like ensuring they have food and shelter, look guiltily around them for a way to improve everyone else's human flourishing, whether they like it or not. This has been the cause of so many of our recent cultural conundrums that we are facing, and it could sound the death knell to this current iteration of democracy. Its main manifestation, this enemy, is what is broadly referred to as wokery, an insidious equity cult which demands that the traditional hierarchical system based on socio-economic structures be replaced by ethnic and sexual grievance hierarchies instead. Society is no longer about the haves and the have-nots, as most people in the affluent West have quite a lot, relatively speaking, compared to their fellow planet inhabitants. It is now about the oppressor and the oppressed, and power and control. Our new roles are decided arbitrarily according to this grievance hierarchy, with straight white men at the top and blind disabled trans lesbians of colour at the bottom. The mission of the woke is to drag the straight white male, whether he lives in a palace or in poverty, down to the level of our wheelchair-bound trans lesbian of colour. Highly narcissistic, lacking in optimism, bureaucratic nightmare. See all the diversity, equity and inclusion non-jobbers who populate the workplace nowadays. And it creates enormous division. And nowhere has this been more evident to see than in the trans debate. Be it the horrendous chemical castration and mutilation of children, incapable of comprehending the magnitude of the consequences of undergoing irreversible medical mutilation, or private spaces for women to go about their intimate business, to public spaces where men, usually mediocre men, cuck males, swap sides and go head-to-head against less physically capable women in female sports. This comprehensively ridiculous debate rather hearteningly came to the head yesterday when it was announced that so-called trans women are to be banned from competitive sport against actual ones. The ever more devious and pernicious Stonewall, whose protesters adorn so many public sector buildings and whose ideology fills so many a public sector mind, were quick to cry, "Transphobia!" and falsely stated that so-called trans people were to being removed from sport. Not true. They can compete against those from their biological sex, as is right and fair, and astonishing it has taken so long for society to embrace some common sense, which has been noticeably uncommon for these past few years. So why has it taken us so long to apply rationality to this simple issue? Could it be the relentless shutting down of debate by playing the phobia card? Phobia, as defined in the Oxford English Dictionary, is the irrational fear, dislike or antipathy of something. It's a mighty allegation, used by the BBC fairly often, admittedly with an Islamo often before it, to quell any righteous anger about uncontrolled immigration, rape gangs in northern cities, or bombs going off at kids' concert. Doesn't seem too irrational to me, if you know what I mean. No one likes to be called phobic, though, with all the kerfuffle that allegation brings, and hence mouths remain shut. And women are deprived of their virginity and their rightful places on podiums. Countless lives and careers destroyed by the suppression of free expression. So, could this trans sport ban be the beginning of a swing back to common sense that those who hold their heads in ever-growing despair at the state of things are so hopeful must surely come? Is the madness of the trans sport debacle a signal flare that people are waking up to the egregious misogyny of this woke movement and all the harms, both physical and emotional, that it brings with it. Perhaps it is too early to tell, but this relentless woke juggernaut, so ingrained in all our institutions, can be stopped. The World Athletics Association and the brave women and men who campaign for fairness over equity have shown us all that we need to do, but we must do it, and we must stand up, use our unique and valuable voices to end this devious charade. After all, as the story goes, it only took one small child to stand out from the crowd and say, "The Emperor isn't wearing any clothes." So, tonight I'm asking you, is it time society got off the trans wagon? Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at LozFox or at GBNews. First up tonight, you will not be surprised with all the news that women's sport is now a distant memory. All professional sport will now have only male participants. Whether anyone, let alone a woman, raised concerns about men infiltrating their spaces, sports and podiums, they were booed and branded bigots, transphobes and monsters. The victims being told to shut up and get on with it, be a good little girl, and not to complain and have nothing left to give, and have started to quit the sports they've dedicated their lives to. Hannah Arendsman is the latest name to add to the wall of shame. Joining me now to discuss this is former NCAA Division Conference champion, Linnea Soles. Good evening, Linnea.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Have you competed against men? Can you tell us a bit of your story?
Yes, so I am formerly a Division I NCAA athlete, as you had just mentioned. I competed for 4 years in undergrad at Southern Utah University, and it wasn't until my senior season and indoor season, which would have been the winter of 2020, that I competed against the first male to female transgender athlete competing in Division I NCAA track and field. This individual had competed in the men's category for 3 years previous at the university of their choosing, before then transitioning and then becoming a part of the female category for their 5th and final year of eligibility in the NCAA.
And how did that make you feel suddenly to be around a man?
It was extremely unfair and truly disheartening to know that all of the time, the work, the effort, the energy that I had been putting into my training, the sacrifices that I had put forth, that last 4 years of being an NCAA athlete was all going to be stripped away from me because there was an individual with a biological advantage over me that was then going to be competing against me in my final season. And
so, do you notice this on the court? Do you feel, is there a different chemistry suddenly between your fellow competitors when a bloke turns up to play?
Well, as I just mentioned, there is a biological difference between men and women. That is why there is separation of sexes in sports. Men tend to be taller, have larger bone density, have larger muscles, weigh more, are stronger, can lift a lot more, can run faster, things of that nature, which is why things such as Title IX have passed to give women a fair opportunity in sport. When you go ahead and enter a competition where you know that an individual has a biological advantage over you, you can see the differences immediately, especially when you're on that starting line at track.
You're being very brave and confident to speak up, but so many of certainly the swimmers in Penn State with Leah Thomas were too frightened to speak about this. Why is that?
I don't think it's an issue of bravery. I mean, I think that I'm speaking for everybody when we realize that this is unfair to allow males to compete in the female category. However, I have received extreme scrutiny from individuals and other people that have decided to stand up and say that we are the ones being discriminatory and we are the ones being unfair, saying that there should be separation of sex in sports. So it only makes sense that people are afraid to speak out about how it makes them feel and how unfair it is because of the backlash that they receive.
And is that a fear of future opportunities that you're being thrown away because of the fear of being called transphobic, or what would you say? Why are some people confident to speak out and why are others less so?
I think because of what you just mentioned, it's very easy to slap labels on individuals and call them things as if you just mentioned, when this isn't an issue of whether or not we think that individuals should be able to express their gender ideology. This is an issue of males and females competing in sports. When it comes to biological advantages, men do have that physiological advantage over women, and so they should not be able to be, women, should not be able to be forced to compete against somebody that already has an unfair advantage over them.
It's very interesting that you use the term gender ideology, because I'm of the opinion that homosexuality is a hardware issue and transgenderism is possibly a software issue. So do you believe this is driven by ideology and the need for some men to succeed regardless, and therefore they're happy to take a transition? Or do you think it is genuinely a transgender person becoming transgender and suddenly finding that they're going to win the next basketball competition by being a foot taller than everybody else?
I can't speak to the reason that an individual decides to transition or go through this journey. I know that it is extremely difficult and there's a lot of different steps and things that you have to face when you decide to move forward with the transition. However, when it comes to competing in sports, I don't think that it's something that somebody can decide to all of a sudden be able to switch categories to one that is less competitive and maybe easier for them to win. And so we need to continue to protect women, just like the World Athletics Association is doing, by not allowing these individuals that have gone through male puberty to compete in the female category. But moving forward, we need to make sure that we are protecting women in all categories and not just the most elite category, which is what World Athletics has just done.
And as far as I can understand, that's a preemptive move by the World Athletics Association, rather than they're not having to deal with something that's already happened. So what's your take on what the World Athletics Association have done? Are you applauding that move, or is it transphobic?
Absolutely, I'm applauding it. I think that this is a very positive trend in governing bodies. I think that they are doing a great job protecting women's sports. This is a vast improvement from what we've seen here in the United States, especially within the NCAA. So I would say that it is 100% a step in the right direction. But as I had previously mentioned in your question before, is they are protecting elite women. And I think that women of all ages in all sports should be protected. But seeing how World Athletics has decided to respond to this is incredibly encouraging, and I think that this is 100% a step in the right direction for protecting women's sports.
So a good day for women's sports, thank heavens, and thank you so much, Linnea Salt. Coming up next is a newish feature. Newish is when you've done it more than 1 week in a row, thanks Cass. A newish and predictably naff, with a newish and predictably naff name. Again, thanks Cass. I am talking to a political commentator and campaigner, Anna McGovern, and Rachel Watkin, eco-entrepreneur, on my Fox and Hounds panel. Back in 3.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Aloha. There's a lot of news during the week, and I'm only allowed to be on your telly box for a single hour of that week, so I invite my news hounds to the studio to discuss some of the topics that caught my eye. Political commentator and campaigner Anna McGovern and Rachel Watkin, eco-entrepreneur. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Right, so look, following on from the trans ban in women's sports, I want to ask my panel their thoughts on it. Right, what do we think?
What do I think? Well, it's about fairness, and if you have a distinct advantage due to being born as a male and then transitioning...
But you don't have a distinct advantage if you don't go through puberty.
But we're not talking about people pre-puberty, we're talking about... Yet. The athletes in question, we're talking about, yes, going through puberty, developing their muscle structure, their lung capacity, and then they have a distinct advantage. My stepfather transitioned, became a mother, or auntie in our case. His hand
Back in the day,
1972.
That's some proper old... You see, that's transitioning I'm up for. 72 transitioning, good. 23 children transitioning, bad. What do you think about that? Because it's obviously a thing, isn't it? Being transgender is obviously a thing.
Yeah.
But it's become a sort of, it's sort of like an epidemic now, especially in young people. You're seeing a lot of trans young people. A lot of people in Australia, sort of a quarter of people are identifying as LGBTQI++++++.
Yeah. I'd like to cut in here because I used to work at a school, and one of the policies, I was working at a boarding school, and there'd be children and young people that would go to boarding school for the first time, and there were two students that I knew who were biological females, and the parents sent them to that school. But then, when they went to the school, they told the teachers was that actually I identify as a boy, and they kept it a secret from the parents. So they gave the school kept it a secret from the parents. And we all had to keep it a secret, and then when we'd communicate with the parents, we had to use, obviously, the biological names of their children. But what they didn't know was that they were actually identifying as a completely different gender. And then there was another child who actually had the full transition from being a biological male into a female, and I think this child was 14 years old and living in the female accommodation. And I think you see stuff like this, and it's absolutely abhorrent. Some of the children, the parents as well. If you're sending your child to a boarding school for the first time, you have no idea that this problem's going on and you can't help or support your child.
Well, I'm worried about it just going home now.
Yeah.
I'm at Rick, is this not good? It's not a good idea, isn't it? It's not good for a parent, for a school to go and subsume the family, secede the family.
No, it's not.
Oh, come on, can you have some really radical views? Like, yeah, it's brilliant, chop it off!
I don't have radical views, but I do think that we are all on a spectrum, without doubt. And I think perhaps there's a lot more going on because the spectrum is becoming more open and people are able to be accepted a lot more on that spectrum. But it creates a whole load of other issues of, you know, of what age is it OK? Surely it's not OK at boarding school.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm not here to listen to two people agree. Shush now, we're moving on. Okay. God, I thought I could get a row out of you, damn it. Next up. Oh, God, you got a row out of me on this one. Next up, yesterday was the 3-year reminder of the first lockdown, lock-in, whatever. Here's a video, Rachel.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes. Shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible. One form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household. Any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home.
What an absolute... God, I can't forgive that man for a second. What do we think, Rachel?
So my question is, how comes the rest of the population could work from home, but they couldn't at number 10?
Because they were too busy getting pissed.
Well, I understand that.
Happy birthday cake.
But why were they there anyway? I mean, obviously he lives there, but he was the only one that does live there. So why was everybody else, even on the premises, why weren't they working on Skype or Zoom?
Having parties. I just think it's absolutely disgraceful because they didn't follow the rules. Everyone else did. We thought we were doing the right thing. Well, good for you.
I didn't follow a single rule at all, but I was berated and chastised and hated by every single national newspaper because I refused to do any of it. So did Boris.
You were told that if you broke the rules, you're putting everyone at risk, people are going to die. And then there they were, flaunting the rules as if it didn't apply for them, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful.
Did you watch the Select Committee hearing?
I did watch it, yeah.
Well,
and
it was quite gripping.
It was just disgraceful because he was just in complete denial, just lying the whole time, saying, no, we didn't do anything wrong. And I just think it's an insult to everyone that, you know, abided by the rules and suffered the consequences of it. You know, so many people lost loved ones during that time, could attend funerals and were completely isolated. And I think we have an even bigger mental health crisis than a COVID crisis at this rate.
I couldn't agree more.
But the point is, it's a much bigger problem in that he clearly lied about a lot of things, not just Partygate.
How many children he's got?
It was just lie after lie after lie. And the story kept changing. You know, originally, of course, there were no parties at all. And then it was, OK, there were only essential parties. I mean, during lockdown, if I'd had an essential party at work, you know, I'm not sure that the police would have quite seen it.
How were you during lockdown? Were you obedient?
Oh, I was as obedient as I could be.
Such a good diplomat. I was so obedient that I'm not going to tell you whether I was obedient at all.
No,
What about the mental health crisis? And you know, this stuff now, I mean, you were talking about people missing funerals. I go on about this a lot. My mother's funeral was 2 days before these little rats were getting drunk in Downing Street. What are you thinking now, post disastrous government failed public health experiment? What do you think?
So, in our company, we had to put every manager through mental health first aid training because absolute mental health crisis. 3 years on, we've still got that. It hasn't changed, you know. We've still got huge levels of staff with anxiety, still not wanting to come into the office. And, you know, this evening I was reading up about the excess deaths. You know, in 2022, up 9%. You know, the worst in 50 years.
Excess deaths?
Excess deaths, yeah.
They don't talk. Shush, you're not allowed to talk about the excess deaths.
But hang on
a minute. No, they're not happening. It's a brilliant policy. It was absolutely brilliant. And what do you think? Just get away from the excess deaths. Not happening. Yeah. Everyone's still alive. The vaccine works.
And I think, going back to the mental health crisis, so a very close friend of mine, during one of the lockdowns, she was completely isolated from home. And I think, especially for young people, you use social media a lot more. So for her, she told me how she'd use TikTok a lot more. And one thing about TikTok is if you look up a particular topic, such as eating disorder, you know, even dieting, mental health, depression, anxiety, your Explore page will be flooded with this kind of content within a couple of minutes. So, and this app is used for with children as young as 13. So imagine if you're looking at content like that and being completely spammed by it.
Well,
and
yeah.
because of that, we're using TikTok quite a lot. She ended up developing quite a severe eating disorder, and she didn't have anyone around her to help her because obviously the lockdown completely isolated from home. And she said if it weren't for the lockdown, she doesn't think she would have developed that eating disorder.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
thank God my kids look at lockdown. All my kids do on TikTok is watch Ronaldo goals. Anyway, I'm tooting the half-time horn because I want to knock Boris Johnson out, but that's something different. Anyway, Anna and Rach shall stay here. We'll be back in 3.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello. So, earlier on the show, I asked you, is it time society got off the trans wagon? So let's see what you've got to say. Scotty says, I get where you're coming from, but it comes across as transphobia because you keep banging on about it. If you care about the sexes, do a feature on domestic violence or FGM. This is an agenda driven by hate alone. Hang on a minute. Isn't FGM exactly what they're doing to children in schools? Sorry, Scotty, not on your side this time. I bet I did. Everyone agreed with me last week, so it's all right that you disagree. Jane says, yes, it's time. You can't change sex. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Right, that's enough from you. They always just, all I get is constant screaming in the ear. Stop it, don't say that. That's enough from you back at home. Back in the studio, we go into round 2, and I want to kick off with the woke arm of the law. According to the story on the front page of the Daily Mail, around 100... Oh, I've got it, look. Around 120 top legal professionals, including that genius legal mind, Jolyon Morm, are set to sign a declaration of conscience, vowing to refuse their services in prosecuting protesters who like gluing themselves to the street, like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. Rachel, you're an eco-warrior, entrepreneur. What do you think?
So, I should agree with this, but I absolutely don't.
Where is your wokey leftism?
I am so sorry. And do you know why? The reason I don't agree with it is where does it stop? So is it then, if we said, OK, that's fine, what happens with doctors? Doctors, do they then say, do you know what, we're not going to treat this rapist patient, you know, he's been taken out of jail straight to A&E, but none of the doctors will treat him.
They would do that nowadays as well. They'd be like, I'm not going to treat him.
Do you know what, or her, sorry, being sexist, they're they.
They, thank you.
But so there's boundaries, and, once you cross that boundary with one profession, what happens with all the other professions?
This is a good point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just think it's obviously part of just an agenda, isn't it? And it's like, again, you've got like rapists, you've got paedophiles at the same time. Everyone has the right to a fair trial. And it just feels like they're targeting one specific issue and just deciding, no, we're just going to stand down from this. It just seems very strange.
What I don't get about lawyers, sorry, Chip, what I don't get is you always thought the lawyers would be sort of empirical people who work in the slow function of discovering truth, not activists. Beep, 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 beep. You just wouldn't have thought it. So I always thought lawyers would generally be more conservative-leaning anyway, because they're just in the business of truth, but they're not.
I don't necessarily think that's true anymore.
No, it definitely isn't true, I know that.
And I just think it undermines kind of the legal process, sort of the legal system, because they're just kind of taking the role of the judge into their own hands. I just think it's just really bad.
Well, fortunately,
it's made into a whole big campaign as well.
Also, Jolyon Morm is the world's least successful lawyer, so that's pretty good.
But what I don't understand is that, I'm reading about it this afternoon. I did criminal law A-level, so I was very aware of the cab rank system. But lawyers for years, or barristers for years, have sort of chosen the cases to some extent by not being available or the rates going up. So if that's happening anyway, why suddenly make a big deal of it?
I think there's a word for... That's the one.
That's the one.
Virtue. So what do we do with the woke lawyers? Should we disbar them all?
How do we disbar?
Just get rid of them.
I mean, I'd be delighted.
Send Jolyon Morm back to his chicken pen. Do we agree?
I would have no complaints about that.
Yeah, we can't allow
OK, is there going to be anything you two don't agree about?
Very sensible.
OK, all right, I know, this is a good one. There's nothing I don't have an opinion about, but I don't have an opinion on this, which is weird. Wolf whistling.
Are you all right?
No, not well. I was dropped repeatedly on the head as a child. Right, wolf whistling, common noise, often heard coming out of cars, cruising by. Well, that sounds a bit dodgy, Cass. Or from the odd builder on a job, even dodgier, Cass. Even as much groups of lads using their basic communicating skills to express their attraction. So while a braverman is cracking down on wolf whistling, I'll immediately open this up to my panel. Ladies, yay or nay in the whistle of the street?
I don't understand it.
That's why I don't have an opinion. I can't do it.
Oh.
No, can't do it.
Would you take offence if a man wolf whistled at you?
No, I'd really like it. This is my problem.
Yeah.
I'm an attention seeker, though.
So what I don't understand is it talks about public places. So if you go to a Magic Mike type...
What's Magic Mike type thing? Should I know what this is?
No, like a strip show.
You don't want to know.
In a public place, and women are wolf whistling at the men on stage. Does that mean that they're all going to be arrested if a barrister will take the case, of course?
Can we replace this woman with a proper leftist? Jeepers creepers. Stop being so grown up and sensible.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go.
I just, in terms of the ban, how is this going to work in the first place? I just think the whole thing is very strange. But also, at the same time, I think if you're trying to proposition a woman, I don't think the best way to do it is whistling at them like a dog, to be fair. But I think you've probably got better priorities than trying to ban something as harmless as wolf whistling. It probably would be quite intimidating if a group of men came up to you trying to wolf whistle at you. Then it might be just a little bit too much. But I think just one wolf whistle, how are you going to ban it? How is this going to work?
I always see the guy on the top of the building just going...
Well, the issue is that they want to set the rules according to what a reasonable person would deem as inappropriate. But if you ask 10 people what is reasonable, they'd all give different answers anyway.
Well, a reasonable person nowadays thinks it's a good idea to lock everyone down even when they're healthy for a disease that will never kill them.
That's legal.
So that's
That's fine.
My trust in the reasonable person is
It's gone out the window.
kind of vanished. So right, the last story. Duty free used to be all about fags and booze. Now it's about condiments as well. What do you think? You've now got to get your ketchup and hot sauce duty free.
I didn't.
Why?
I didn't understand this, and the reason I didn't is because if the sauces or whatever are for home use, they are VAT-free anyway. There is no tax. So.
But what about if they're cheaper in other countries?
Well, if you go on holiday and you have your budget of 200 quid to spend abroad, whether you spend it...
Big spending money.
Whether you spend it in a restaurant...
Looking for any employees in your eco company?
Whether you spend it in a restaurant or whether you spend it on a load of ketchup to put in your suitcase, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference to the UK economy, and there is no tax fraud, so I don't get it.
Like for me personally, me and a group of friends, like once a month, we'll do something really cheap in Europe for a weekend, Skyscanner it, and it actually works out cheaper than a night out in London, because generally in Europe it's cheaper anyway, even just for buying drinks and stuff like that, like for a night out. But I wouldn't necessarily go over there with, the goal of I'm going to get as much ketchup as I can in my suitcase and bring it back.
Well, you haven't
cost of living crisis.
You haven't allocated the 200 quid when you're on holiday and it costs $19.99 in the first place. I mean, and you're killing penguins. Right, I'm very, very upset about my panel, who I'd like to thank very much, Anna McGovern and Rachel Watkin this evening, who have joined me, and happen to agree on almost everything.
I'm so sorry.
Catastrophic mess up, and Cass will be out of a job soon. Coming up, we cast our eye over the pond with Chairman of the Republicans abroad to get the latest on that never-ending Trump non-indictment and the laptop of Hunter Biden. De retour dans 3 minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Willkommen back. It's time for a look at the drama across the pond now. It's not been a quiet week in US politics. Unmaterialized expectations of former President Donald Trump being arrested, budding Republican nominee Ron DeSanctimonious, as he's called, DeSantis, causing a stir after calling the war in Ukraine merely a territorial dispute, and the first offspring of the United States, dear, wonderful Hunter Biden, reportedly suing the repairman who let loose the contents of his much-defamed laptop. Well, let's get a full analysis of the events from the States, from Chairman of Republicans Overseas, UK, Greg Swenson. Greg, how are you doing?
Great to be here, Laurence.
What happened? No indictment.
Big week. Yeah, there's a little disappointment, and I think even President Trump was disappointed. You know,
he wanted to get handcuffed.
Yeah, he wants the drama. He wanted to be, you know, he really wanted to be arrested, not just indicted. But I think the normal procedure would be, you know,
come to Mar-a-Lago.
Their lawyers call his lawyers. They have a nice, quiet indictment. You know, he gets fingerprinted or whatever. But I think Trump would much rather go into a police cruiser with handcuffs.
And what's his name? The guy, Bragg.
Alvin Bragg. Yeah.
So the audience understand who aren't familiar with the story.
Sure.
Alvin Bragg is a Soros-funded prosecutor.
That's right.
From Manhattan.
Right.
Who wants to go over this Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels, how he paid Stormy Daniels off, allegedly, or did or didn't.
Yeah.
And Alvin Bragg wants to get him on a misdemeanor where the statute of limitations has been removed. Right. On this.
So the case is completely baseless. Yeah. And the only way it might work with a conviction is that 84% of the jury pool in Manhattan is, you know, voted for Biden. So they really hate Trump, not in all of New York City, but just in Manhattan. So it's a baseless case. Even Alvin Bragg knew it really had little credibility. So he chose not to pursue it when he was first elected, even though he campaigned on, I'm going to get Trump. That was his campaign slogan, you know, get Trump, like a lot of these Soros-backed DAs. But the problem is he also doesn't prosecute real criminals. Right, so he's extremely lenient. He's one of these bail reform Soros guys. So, you know, violent crime in New York is rampant, right? All the numbers are up significantly. And here he's spending taxpayer dollars and a lot of his time on getting Trump. So, you know, it could work. Again, they could get a conviction because I think most jurors in Manhattan will do anything to get Trump, like Alvin Bragg. But even Cyrus Vance, his predecessor, refused to prosecute because the case was so useless. The feds, you know, the Justice Department also refused to do it. So this is purely political. And I think after Trump announced that he was running again in December, that really forced the radical progressive left, people that support Alvin Bragg, the Soros crowd, really pressured him to go ahead with this case against his better judgment.
So let me get this right. Okay, the Democrats have got everything stitched up. They've got the prosecutors, they've got the police force, they've got everything stitched up, and they're still terrified to the point where they want to take down Trump on what is essentially a misdemeanor. They can't get him. Why?
They've been trying for 6 years. You know, they've had countless investigations and lawsuits. Yeah, it's really not a good sign, and I hope. I mean, in many ways, I hope the Republicans don't just come back with whataboutism and do the same thing. You know, there's plenty of things that they could go after about Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. You know, they don't want to. I think the Democrats are foolish to run this kind of campaign and force these guys like Alvin Bragg on the citizens. Forget about what he's doing to Trump. These radical DAs have been really bad for working people and poor people in the big cities who are always the victims of the crime. You know, this is the very identity groups that they're always arguing for and claiming that they identify with. They're the ones that suffer the most. You know, 90% of violent crime in Chicago, my hometown, is on African Americans.
Yeah, which is a tragedy
and you can thank
never,
the DA.
ever gets spoken about.
Kim Foxx in Chicago is no different than Alvin Bragg, except that he's going after Trump because he can.
So where does this leave the Democrats? Do you think that there was a bit where they had to just stop and go, look, if we go after Trump, if the man is in handcuffs, having spent the Russian brain.
The collusion hoax.
Collusion hoax.
Yep, they tried that. Yep.
That if they did put him in handcuffs, that they knew that they would not win the next election. Do you think that was it?
See, this is the problem. I think there might have been some pressure from the Democrats. Originally, it was pressure from the radical progressive left to prosecute Trump, which was foolish because it's such a weak case. But now you might have the mainstream Democrats, the moderates, the powers that be in Washington saying, you're just going to elevate Trump. Now, maybe they want to do that because they don't want to run against Ron DeSantis. Maybe they want to run against Trump, so let's bump his numbers up. After the raid on Mar-a-Lago, Trump went from +9 over DeSantis to +39. Just
Really?
because of the raid.
What do you make of DeSantis? So I quite like... So DeSantis is taking a traditional Republican view, which is this is a... To a degree, isn't it? He's saying it's serious, but we need to not be involved.
Right.
Essentially.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he kind of got a little dig on Trump by saying, you know, I don't get involved in this little, you know, that silly, sleazy stuff, right? But then he also said it's purely political. So did Mike Pence, who's also going to run against Trump. Anybody who's credible has said this is a complete politicization of the criminal justice system. It's really sad to see. But I think the Democrats have to be smart about this. It very well could elevate Trump in the near term. You asked about DeSantis. DeSantis, I think, is who they're really afraid of.
Will he run?
Because he's a populist like Trump, and he's very similar to Trump. But he doesn't have the baggage, and he's got just a killer record from Florida. I mean, he's just crushed it on every metric in Florida as governor for the last 4.5 years.
Has he said he's going to run? Did he tell?
Not yet, but he obviously is.
Do you think? You see, if Trump goes, so in my head, tell me if I'm wrong. Yeah. If Trump goes and loses to DeSantis, will he endorse DeSantis?
That's a big question.
Because I don't think he will.
No, and that's
judging
the
by
problem.
what he's writing.
Yeah.
So if I'm DeSantis, I'm sitting there going, when does Florida run out? 2024? When does his governorship run out?
Not for 4 years.
Not for another 4 years.
Right.
So I mean, that's something to be considered,
it's a great question,
isn't it?
and everybody's thinking about that, you know, and all the candidates that are considering or are running against him. But DeSantis has so much political capital right now, he has to run. Because in 4 years, people might forget about him. You know, this is just the way it works. It's momentum. You know, he's on a roll. You have to honor the roll when everything's going that well for you. And he's a textbook candidate. You know, Navy SEAL, naval officer, Yale, Harvard, the whole thing. I mean, beautiful wife. You know, and again, he's just really managed Florida well. It's not the Don. And that's why Trump is still polling ahead of him. I mean, there is a very loyal group to Trump, and there's an argument to be made that Trump has done it already. He did what he said he was going to do. Not without some chaos, not without some scandal, some turnover, some personnel issues, but everything major that he said. I think he made some mistakes.
He was wrong on Fauci.
Absolutely, he was, and I think surely Ron DeSantis will point that out quite a bit if they do end up campaigning against each other.
Who do you rate? Who do you rate for it? Who do you want for it?
I would prefer DeSantis, and it's not because I don't like Trump, and it's not that I don't think that. I mean, the question is, can he win? And so I think DeSantis has a better chance of winning, and that's what it's all about. It's winning, right? Because Trump lost the House in 2018, he lost in 2020, and he
really messed up
with irregularities.
He messed up.
That's on him.
So bad by not going
wounds.
after Georgia. It was just stupid.
Yeah. So there were so many things that he did wrong, and COVID was maybe too hard to overcome. His communications, as you know, weren't great during the COVID crisis. He stuck with Fauci, which was a massive mistake. You know, it's easy for us to say that now because now we know that Fauci was a fraud, and so many of the advocates of mask mandates and vax mandates were frauds. But it's easy to say now. But he did make some mistakes. But generally speaking, if you look at the big issues for Americans, the economy, jobs, wage growth, national defense, security, defense spending, he crushed it on all of those metrics.
He's going to be remembered. At the end of the day, he's going to be remembered as a great president, whether he serves a second term or not. And maybe it's time that he gives DeSantis a go and no third party.
And I would hope so. And that's another thing, is Trump can only serve one term. So, DeSantis would serve two terms. If he governs the country anything like he governed, governs Florida, he'll crush it. So we'll see. I mean, I think these primaries, the debates will be healthy. The key is that anybody that's polling in the single digits needs to drop out after New Hampshire and Iowa.
Oh, well, thank you for joining me.
Great to be
here. And the most handsome American in London I've ever seen in my life. Coming up next is the lengthy Mark Dolan. What's on your show, Mark, tonight?
Laurence, another brilliant effort. Thank you so much. It is Mark Dolan tonight from 8. A busy show. Boris Johnson was grilled on Wednesday by MPs. But has Britain moved on from the blonde bombshell? Has Boris Johnson been consigned to the dustbin of history? We'll debate that with one of his top supporters. Also, has Brexit finally been put to bed, given the fact that the so-called Windsor framework, the Brexit breakthrough, is now law? We'll discuss that with a prominent Eurosceptic. What are Tesco doing, reducing the value of club card points during a cost of living crisis? That's the topic of my Take at 10. And in my big opinion, 3 years on from the horror of lockdowns, never again. That's my big opinion at 9. We've got big names, we've got my top pundits and tomorrow's papers. And your emails, mark@gbnews.uk. A packed 3 hours. I'll see you after this.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family.